Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time when silence speaks louder than words, and a single move rewrites history. India, often underestimated, chose not to shout, but to act. And in that quiet resilience, the world was shaken. Power is not in noise. It is in intention, in belief, in action taken when the world expects you to bow. What stuns the global stage is not just the strike, but the courage behind it. Strength lies not in overpowering others, but in realizing your own worth and standing tall despite the storms. There are moments in history that do not come with loud announcements or warning sirens. They arrive like the quiet before a storm, like the flicker of a candle in a dark room, unnoticed at first, yet destined to change everything. We often assume that power lies in those who speak the loudest, who stand the tallest, or who dominate the front pages of global media. But true power, real and unshakable, lives quietly in hearts that are resilient, in minds that are focused, and in nations that are underestimated. India made a move, not just a political decision, not just a strategic play. It was a statement, and not just to the world, but to itself. It was a reminder that sometimes you don't have to fight the noise. You just have to become the signal. The unexpected strike wasn't just a tactical maneuver. It was a spiritual awakening. It reminded the world that silence is not weakness, and patience is not surrender. The global powers watched first in disbelief, then in awe. For years they had written the script, directed the stage, cast the actors. But India became the unexpected protagonist, the one no one had prepared for, the one who rewrote the narrative without permission. And while some nations were calculating impact and outcomes, India had already stepped into action with clarity. It was never about proving something to others. It was about proving something to itself. Because there comes a time in every journey when you must stop looking outward for validation and start digging deep to discover your own voice. People often ask, what does it take to surprise the world? Courage, intelligence, resources? No, it takes conviction. It takes the kind of belief that does not shake even when mountains do. That's what we witnessed, a kind of quiet revolution. Not led by chaos, but by clarity. Imagine a river, flowing for centuries, gentle, generous, giving life. People drink from it, build around it, and yet never thank it. Then one day, that river rises not to destroy, but to remind. It reminds the world that it too holds power. That is what India did. This unexpected strike was not just a response. It was a revelation. It was the moment when the world saw not just a developing nation, but a determined one. Not just a country with a past, but a country crafting its own future with its own hands. And that, my friends, is far more powerful than any headline. In every room of power, there are whispers now. Whispers about what India did, not because it shook the ground, but because it shook perceptions. The global order was not just surprised, it was humbled. The idea that power always comes from the West was challenged, and not with aggression, but with intention. You see, the true beauty of any nation is not in its weapons or its wealth. It is in its wisdom, and India showed wisdom. The kind that comes not from textbooks, but from ancient soil, from a culture that has survived every invasion, every empire, every attempt to erase its identity. And still, it stands, not bitter, not broken, but beautifully whole. So when the strike happened, the world expected rage. What they got was grace. They expected noise. What they heard was silence. They expected hesitation. What they saw was precision. That's why they were stunned, not because India acted, but because of how India acted. Let me ask you something. How often do we limit others based on outdated assumptions? How often do we label, stereotype, judge? And yet, how often do we pause to look again, to listen again, to reconsider what we think we know. This event forced that pause. It forced the world to take a second look, to ask deeper questions, and most importantly, to rethink the meaning of strength. Strength is not about domination, it's about direction. It's not about flexing muscles. It's about holding your ground when everything else tries to move you. India stood its ground, not for war, not for victory, but for dignity. Because let me tell you something very personal. Dignity cannot be borrowed. It cannot be gifted, it must be claimed, and that's what happened here. A nation claimed its place not just on a map, but in the conscience of the world. I want you to think about the moments in your own life when you were underestimated, when people looked at you and saw only your flaws, not your fire, when they mistook your silence for surrender, when they forgot that every slow step you took was grounded in strength. That's the feeling that resonates with this moment. This wasn't just geopolitics. It was personal, it was emotional. It was human because nations are not made of cement and steel. They are made of people with dreams, doubts, heartbreaks, and hope. And when a nation rises unexpectedly, it is not a machine rising. It is a heartbeat accelerating. It is a million prayers echoing as one. It is a billion souls remembering who they are. And the world can no longer ignore that. Not because of one action, but because of what that action revealed, that the center of power is shifting. Not in aggression, but in awareness. The most powerful moments in history are not always the loudest. They're the ones that leave us speechless. This was one of them, and yes, America the mighty, the proud was powerless. Not because it lost something, but because it couldn't predict this. And that's the most beautiful irony. Sometimes, the most sophisticated radar cannot detect the rise of quiet resolve. Sometimes, the mightiest powers are caught off guard not by weapons, but by will. So here we are, witnesses to a turning point. To a nation that stepped beyond expectation, that dared to act not with noise, but with nuance. I believe what truly stuns the world is not when the expected happens, but when the impossible becomes inevitable. That is what this strike represented, not a clash, but a calling. It called out to every forgotten voice, every overlooked talent, every silent warrior. It said, your time is now. And if you're sitting here, doubting your place, doubting your purpose, let this be your reminder. Never let the world tell you what you can or cannot become. Because just like nations, individuals too can rise quietly, unexpectedly, powerfully. Let this moment be more than just political history. Let it be personal prophecy, because the message is simple. Don't wait for permission to shine, just rise. Even if the world isn't watching, especially when they're not watching, that is when revolutions are born. Quiet ones, lasting ones, necessary ones, and somewhere, somehow, someone right now is still asking, how did India do it? The answer is simple. They believed, and belief, my friends, is the most underestimated strike of all. So as we reflect on this moment, not just as observers, but as part of a changing world, remember this: India's unexpected strike was never just about geopolitics. It was about awakening. It was about rewriting what the world thought it knew. It reminded us all that strength doesn't need validation, and dignity doesn't ask for applause. The world may have been stunned, superpowers may have been silenced, but in that silence a deeper truth echoed: when a nation rises with belief, with purpose, and with quiet conviction, even the loudest empires must pause. And perhaps that is the greatest power of all, not to dominate, but to awaken, not to react, but to redefine, not to be feared, but to be respected. India didn't just surprise the world, it reminded it that even in a world of giants, the soul of a sleeping lion still roars. And that roar needs no permission.